A blonde, a redhead, term papers, web shooters, and the Green Goblin. Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey.
Hello. I, first of all, almost said I'm Taylor Trask.
You should have just went with it. I would have been like, and so am I.
Yeah.
And so are you.
And secondly, the stinger that I opened this with, as we were having trouble coming up with one, and then I said, oh, I got it. I don't want you to give me too much credit for that because that's actually written on the inside cover of this. Which
is it really?
Hopefully gives you
oh my God,
they're feeling of the tone of this book. I am talking about, should we chit chat? Let's chit chat.
Let's chit chat.
Jump right into this. I have terribly sad news, which is the comic book shop that I have patronized for 11 years now. It closed its doors yesterday, and that's Comics Unlimited in Huntington Beach / Westminster, California. Yeah, and it adding to the tragedy. Like, I knew something was up. It was kind of a thing of like, I'm going in and I wasn't seeing the clerks that I knew there, and you could just tell, like, but it didn't show the signs of closing. I just thought like, oh, that's the transition period or whatever, and then adding to the tragedy of this is that the personal tragedy of it is that because I'm just kind of unplugged on social media, didn't even realize it was the last day until yesterday, as of the time we're recording this, when I had to work all day. So I just, take a break from working and flip on Instagram and watch a story, which I never watch, and see that it's closing. And I was like, oh my God. And I wasn't done till after 6, and then my friend Lainey posted a picture of the lights out in the place, and it was like, oh my God, like it's gone.
That's too bad. Why do you think it closed? What do you think?
I would assume it's just like raising rents and lack of income and stuff. But I really hate that. I've had it's like it's meant so much to me in so many ways over the years, and I've had so many. I've discovered so many great comics from Denise and Lainey, who worked there, and also Mark, who Mark probably wouldn't personally know my name, but I've talked to him several times about what all sorts of things. I remember talking to him for a long time about digital versus print, and getting this whole take on the industry from him, like way back in the day when
you better buy print or we'll close one day.
And it wasn't even in that regard. It was just both of us talking about, and it's something that started our podcast, which was we found digital comics to be inferior, and we were like, this is like sort of the last bastion of analog media, and it was like a prescient conversation, I guess, in that respect, because I would assume you just get, stretched out. It was also I would say like a mid-sized comic book store. I mean, you live in the city of Mile High Comics, so there's like, you have a warped scale maybe.
Well, it's funny you should say that though, but the Mile High Comics that used to be on Colorado Boulevard also closed back in, I think, May. Okay. I was up in Denver for a day trip, and just like you, same exact scenario. I just wasn't, I'm not on Facebook anymore, so I didn't notice anything. And I drove by, and it was like Gremlins. Like the entire store was completely cleaned out. Nothing was in there. I was like, what the hell? And I looked up, and they're like, oh no, this had closed a couple months prior. Which is kind of sad, because when I was living in Lowry, where you stayed with us a few times up there, that was typically the shop I would go to. But I do wonder, having moved to the Springs, I feel, we got Mile High Comics in Denver, which is a gigantic warehouse superstore. And then now I think there used to be 3. Now there's 1 satellite store also in Denver. Their satellite is in the Lakewood area. There used to be two others, one in Littleton and then this other one that closed. But like moving down here, Colorado Springs, as I've mentioned many times, has just some of the best shops in the country outside of Portland. And I always, I'll walk in and there will always be part of me that goes, oh, thank God this store's here. And then I'm like, man, I hope this never closes. I do think that there's a danger for those shops that are sort of that mid-size. They don't really have they have a lot of great stuff, but they may not have like a very specific point of view. I don't know. I'm always wondering if comic shops, if we're living through sort of the late 90s comic shop experience in terms of music stores, where like at some point they're just going to start all going down for one reason or another. I don't know. I hope not.
I don't know. I preface this with I have no applicable business skills virtually to anything, but definitely to comic book shops and like brick and mortar stores. But there's nothing Comics Unlimited could have done about this, because you imagine like you get into that space 30, 40 years ago. Well, that's your space. Like all business, is telling you to grow and expand and stuff. And I don't think they had that mindset, but maybe when I just don't, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know when a mid-sized store can make the pivot to becoming a small curated shop,
Mm-hmm.
And would a small curated shop just face the same dangers even faster? Because I think back to actually the first comic book store I went to when I moved out here in 2008 was on my street, and it was such an insane experience. Like it was just not the neighborhood for a comic book shop kind of thing, but it was this tiny little hole in the wall, and they went out of business like within a few months of me moving here. So I don't know how long they were there, but they obviously couldn't sustain the traffic. Like they just didn't have enough traffic to sustain like a physical inventory kind of thing. And there was another one nearby that it was only open a few days a week kind of thing, so I just don't know. And what are comic book shops supposed to be these days? Are they supposed to be game shops also? Or,
good question.
And like I go to this game shop to play D&D and shop for games, but the space they have is huge. Like it is like warehouse size. And you can't help but think like there's no way this is sustainable, There's a ton of people in here on D&D night, but none of them are buying games. Like we all buy like supplements and some dice and maybe some miniatures or something, but that's it. Like, how often are you selling one of those $200 game sets or something? Like that's,
it's interesting you say that, because Muse Comics, the store that you and I have visited here in Colorado Springs, they actually expanded from their old location to literally the same strip, like the same kind of store strip. They just went like a door down into a bigger space to accommodate more Magic the Gathering and D&D playing and that kind of stuff.
Boy.
So they're very much half a really great comic shop, half game shop. I've seen other stores like that too, whereas Escape Velocity is much more just straight up comic stuff. They have some Magic things, but that's almost like the end cap and a convenience store. It's not really their focus. And I'm always curious about that, because there is obviously a heavy gaming culture and a heavy Magic the Gathering culture and all the other related games. But think about this though. In the last 15 years, we've seen obviously music stores across the country completely close, leaving probably some really killer, indie music stores, primarily with vinyl. I'm thinking of like Grimey's in Nashville.
Yeah.
That sort of level. And they're few and far between, but that's kind of what's left. A ton of bookstores have closed, but comic shops haven't quite had that happen, which is interesting because comic sales were never as big as standard bookstores or music stores in their prime. In the 80s and 90s, music stores were like, the biggest cash cows ever. Obviously not at all anymore due to the economics, but comic shops have always kind of been this kind of underground thing. And some of them make it work by doing, a hybrid with a game store. Some of them make it work by just being incredibly intentional about their curation. I'm thinking Bridge City Comics in Portland as a great example.
Yeah.
And there's kind of everything in between. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm never going to be one of those people who thinks digital comics is killing the comic shop. I think quite the opposite. Digital comics, in several examples I can think of, not even personal, not even anecdotal, but just several examples. Like digital comics, if used correctly, can actually enhance sales at a comic shop, especially if those comic shops carry hardcovers and higher end books and interesting things. But it does come down to shelf space and rent cost and how you allocate those two things. And whew, I don't know. That is a whole episode for another day. It would be great to actually get some comic shop owners on the podcast over the next couple episodes just to talk to that point, because I'm curious what they think.
Yeah, I agree. I'm my mind is going crazy because I'm thinking of all those different spaces, and you and I have talked about this before, but I think it's such an interesting what do I want to say, like a locus of some of that change was this place called The Great Escape in Nashville. And so myself growing up in Nashville, there was this one main location, and the main room, which was pretty big, was full of comics. And there was a little tiny record store in the back. And by the time you moved to Nashville, it had reversed. And the comics were in the back. And the music store, and especially used music, I mean, almost all used music, right? And maybe some local new stuff. But that was the front of the store. And it's like you physically saw that change in the economy. Like they went, the comic, and that was the 90s, of course. Like you say, it was like they were making hand over fist with used music. It was insane. So, yeah, we'll give you 50 cents for this CD that we're going to resell for $10,
I never realized when we're talking about the Vanderbilt sort of location. Escape, which I was down there every weekend. They used to have this thing called the Dollar Wall, and which is, is an entire wall of CDs, and they're all $1. And man, I would just grab 10 at a time because some of it was interesting to me. But I would grab a bunch, take them home, scan them, like rip them into iTunes, come back and resell them so that they went back to the ecosystem again. And I would just do this constantly.
That's such a thumb in the eye of their model. That's amazing.
Yeah, but if anything, it helped them because they made money off of me. And then they got them back and they rewatched them again a second time. So I don't know. But you're right. The comics part of that did get moved into a back room.
But at the same time, it almost became a more interesting experience once it moved into the back room because it had to become more curated. Like when it was that main room, that was unbelievable to me when I was a 12-year-old because I would just sit on that disgusting floor and go through their like quarter books, they're like 25-cent books or less, and just pull out stacks of them. And so, for like $3, I could go home with 12 comic books and be like, oh my God, this is amazing. But once it moved into the back room, that's where I really became aware of things like Watchmen and Sandman and stuff because they were able to call it out and call more attention to it, and it just became a more curated comic book experience, even while the music room sort of took over that free for all.
Yeah.
And there's still a Great Escape on, I guess it's on Charlotte Pike. Nolensville closed and downtown closed. And so there's still like West Side Great Escape. And it is insanely huge to the point where you're like, how can you even make this happen? Like, it's like all music. There's a little bit of comics in the back with like some toys, but definitely
it's all music.
So much of it is, yeah.
Wow, how are they pulling that off? I wonder.
Well, a ton of it is like just new vinyl now.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sorry. There are also, I shouldn't say all. I mean, there's also video games and DVDs and VHS, but it just feels largely music when you walk in.
Got it.
I think that's got to be the Great Escape. Anyway, sorry, I just.
It's okay.
It's emotional.
A moment of silence for your
Comics Unlimited. Yes. Yeah.
Anyway.
No,
wait, real quick. That's not where you would normally do book club, is it?
It is. But book club has been reinstated. It is just no longer attached to the comic book store.
Okay.
But yeah, Lainey is still running that. In fact, that is we are the first regrouping of this happens today, the day after Comics Unlimited closed. So.
Well.
Yeah.
Let the spirit live on with its.
I'm glad that she's pulled it back together. So I think we all are. I think we all need this.
Yeah.
So with that sad note, I have a really a fun book. We had a
Good.
fun book on the last episode. I am going to be talking about Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's Spider-Man Blue.
Ooh.
So I have previously talked about Hulk Gray in way back in episode number 57, so 70 episodes ago,
Oh my God.
or something like that. It feels like it was like January 2018 when I talked about that. Anyway, as you know, Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale have collaborated on a ton of books. They are almost like it's hard to say. Like you know that saying all of them are excellent has got to be an exaggeration, but all of them are excellent. And they specifically did this great run in the Batman universe. They did A Long Halloween. They did Dark Victory. They did some other thing that I can't remember. And then they did Catwoman When in Rome. And they're all just like amazing. And when I was getting back into comics as an adult, like The Long Halloween is still the ultimate Batman book to me. Like that's just you're just done. Like that was perfect, you know?
Which, by the way, just quick aside, there's a lot of rumor circulating that the Robert Pattinson Batman movie is going to basically be The Long Halloween.
Well, that is a lovely preface to this because so they did a run for Marvel, which were all color themed for certain superheroes. So they did Hulk Gray, in which the Hulk was gray, which was his original like printed color before they could get the green right or something like that. So they were, it was this like great play on that, but also the duality of Banner and Hulk. Like it's kind of a gray area.
Oh yeah, I love that.
So the whole thing happened. Banner was in like a psychologist's office talking to him about events, and then they did Daredevil Yellow. So back in, when Daredevil was in the yellow costume and played off that, and then Spider-Man Blue, and then I think Captain America Red. And so I think that's the only one I haven't read is the Captain America one. I kind of forgot about its existence until I read this and was looking up stuff. And I read this many years ago. I have the hardcover, which I probably bought at Comics Unlimited. And then last weekend it was available on there's so many stupid services. So Amazon Prime reading is not Kindle Unlimited, nor is it Comixology Unlimited. But if you're a Prime member, you can get certain books for free. And as you know, I was about to get on a train and I thought, oh yeah, I should pick like a book to read. And I have a ton on Comixology, but this one was recommended to me on Amazon. I was like, oh, it's free. And I've read that before. And that looks, that'd be a fun thing to revisit. So it may still be available for free to Prime members to read. But I would highly recommend if you're at all interested in that and you want to collect it, like buy it. Not necessarily a hardcover, but in print. Because as you mentioned on our last episode, there are just things that just don't translate to that guided view. And there are such huge, beautiful splash pages and these like, how do I want to say it? I mean, it is a splash. It's like a double page layout kind of thing where it's not just a splash page. It tells part of the story in this like a very painterly way where Tim Sale just takes up the whole 2-page spread to do it. And you miss all of that in the guided view, on digital. You can still tell the art's fantastic and the colors are really interesting, but you're not getting that layout of it. And especially in hardback, because when I got back home and picked up the hardback and could crack it open, it was like, oh wow, here's this huge spread that I had forgotten about when I was reading it digitally. But the artwork, I love it, and it is at once like it's a throwback to sort of, I think they are paying homage to like 70s greats, and I don't know who would have been on Spider-Man at the time, if that was like Kirby or Romita. I don't know who did what, but it has that sort of 70s throwback feel. But I guess one thing I'd like to point out is that in the 21st century, I don't know that works for Spider-Man. Like we've kind of had an update to Spider-Man's overall aesthetic, and I don't just mean like the costume, but that does not come across. So in a lot of ways, this feels like reading sort of an Archie comics, where it's intentionally a throwback, and you're not really sure of what era we're talking about. And to complicate that, like the blue story of this is Peter Parker telling the story of his relationship with Gwen Stacy, and when he met Mary Jane. He's telling this into a tape recorder as if he's narrating the story to Gwen. Like, Gwen, you never knew this because you died too soon. So, not to put too fine a point on it, but Spider-Man is blue. You know, he is sad. So, yes, it's supposed to be that sort of haze of nostalgia and feel very much like an Archie's throwback to the old Spider-Man. I don't know. All I'm pointing out is that, like, reading it again in this year, you know, the year after Into the Spider-Verse, is like, does that still work? You know, it's weird. The colors on it are all 70s Marvel color palette. Like, blondes are not blonde, they are yellow, like, like that's what it's, when what's his name, Flash, is wearing like his letter jacket, it is like royal blue, like in your face blue, and his face is so pink. But it's not done with the Ben-Day dots like the printing we specifically called out in Mr. Miracle, where it's, the little CMYK dots that make up the coloring. They are solid colors. So it's very much like a modern digital kind of color technique, even if it's throwback colors. So that just makes it really vivid. Like this is loud color wise. Mm-hmm. And it is just, okay, so let me start with the year. This was printed in 2002. I think that's when it came out. I believe it was a 6-issue run, and then, pretty much like all of their runs were like made to be, collected. So I would treat this more like a graphic novel than a trade paperback or a collected edition. It feels, in fact, I think they are labeled as chapters or parts or something like that. It's not so much like issue 3, it's chapter 3. What is strange to me, which I had to look up rereading it, and I remember thinking this at the time because I did not get it in 2002. I probably got it around 2008 or 9. What was interesting to me was that so much of this feels like not necessarily the plot, but the elements and characters in Spider-Man 3, the movie, that I had to look up when that came out, because in my mind, it is so bad that it came out like 30 years ago. But that only came out in 2007, the year before Iron Man.
Wait, that was Spider-Man 3 was 2007?
I still can't even believe it, but I am staring at it on Google right now.
I guess that makes sense because the first one was 02, May of 02. Is that right?
Yep.
May of 02? Yeah, May of 02. The second one, the Alfred Molina one, was I think 04. So yeah, that would make sense.
And that means that the what's his name reboot that happened too fast.
Andrew Garfield.
Actually, that was 2011. So that was 4 years later ish. 2011, I think. Maybe it was 2010. Man, that was a quick turnaround. So they just did not let that one settle at all. Everyone went, let's get that taste out of our mouth.
But, and then anyway. They did it again. After Jamie Foxx ruined it for everybody. They're like, nope, one more time. Tom Holland.
Let's try this again. And then as soon as that one like really sticks with people, then Sony's like, we got it. We'll take it back from you, and
we got it from here.
Yeah.
One of the most depressing things though about the latest Spider-Man movie is that how they do the production company bumpers at the beginning or the end of those movies. Every time I see a Pascal production, I'm like, oh God. And that would be, of course, for Amy Pascal, who was fired after the Sony emails were hacked and leaked and everything like that. But yet because she had signed an ironclad agreement to be listed as a producer on the Spider-Man movies, even if she's not at Sony, she's still getting that credit and that money, which is like, oh, God damn it. Anyway. Random aside.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm like flipping through this, so absolutely. I mean, Sam Raimi must have been aware of this comic book for sure. It's just hard to say, like, how much did it really, the story.
Wait. back. When did the comic come out?
2002.
Oh,
So
okay.
so Raimi would have been in production on Spider-Man 1, if not, maybe this came out after that or concurrent to it to sort of, tie in or something. Um, but so I don't know if that's a credit to Raimi just being like this, incredible Spider-Man fan, which was definitely the story at the time of how, he had Spider-Man posters in his room and like that was his, he pitched so hard to be the Spider-Man director. And I think that first movie, like really, like that was a huge superhero movie at the time. Like that sort of opened our eyes to what could be done.
It was as big as Iron Man when it came out.
As bad as we like to remember 3, number 1, I don't think it's as bad as X-Men 3. And number 2, it's definitely not as bad as other shit we've seen. Like, I think Justice League, Bat-Soup, and Suicide Squad are all worse than Spider-Man 3, or at least in the same genre of, like, confusing villains and, like, too much, but still not.
When was the last time you saw Spider-Man 3? When was the last time you watched it?
I watched it like a month ago.
Okay, so it's still fresh. I was gonna say because it feels like in hindsight it almost gets worse over time.
I totally agree
all
with
you
that.
remember is that freaking dance sequence with emo Peter Parker, and you're just like, oh Christ.
And I rewatched it because I had just re-listened to How Did This Get Made's episode on it, which was really funny because I think on that one it's like Kulap Vilaysack is their guest, and she and June liked it, and then the men didn't like it, Anyway, so I had recently revisited, so that was kind of fresh in mind when I went to this, and so I say that all to say, like, when we read this now, you're absolutely going to tie it into the Sam Raimi verse, because what happens in this one is as he's retelling the story of Gwen Stacy and his, like, blossoming romance with her, the whole Sinister Six is getting involved in this weird way. Like there's somebody behind the scenes is pulling the strings. Norman Osborn has been put into a coma from a fight with Spider-Man. And when he comes out of that, he does not remember.
The fight or being the Green Goblin or all the above?
Everything. So Harry does not yet know, what hurt his father and what, I think they all buy the excuse that like Norman was just in the wrong place, when this accident happens during this fight. But of course he was the Green Goblin. Spider-Man just took him out of the suit and, got him help. But while that's happening, like Vulture is attacked in prison and he's about to die. And as he's dying, the criminal that's he doesn't know this criminal has poisoned him. He thinks this criminal's trying to save him, and that criminal's like, "You're about to die. Tell me where your last suit is." And so that guy gets out of prison and he gets the Vulture suit, and then the old Vulture ends up coming back, and then the Rhino's involved, and Dr. Connors turns into the Lizard, and then eventually we find out that like Kraven the Hunter is the one that's been following Spider-Man this whole time, and now I've already forgotten the hook, so I don't even have to worry about spoiling it to you.
Does that become too much in terms of all the Rogues Gallery, like in the same story?
Yes, and such a throwback to Spider-Man 3. Where you're like, another villain? What?
They're all here. Here they all are. I mean, let's be honest. Spider-Man does, other than Batman, Spider-Man probably has the best Rogues Gallery, I think, in all of comics.
It's very colorful, and they're all animals.
Yeah, it's true.
Or insects or whatever. So yes, there's a lot going on. There is like a deeper mystery of like, why are all these people coming after him with such vengeance? And adding to that is the pressure of Peter Parker like falling for Gwen Stacy and basically being seduced by Mary Jane, which in the most delicate terms I can put together, this is the horniest representation of these characters I've ever read.
Wow.
Like they are so thirsty for Peter Parker. It is unbelievable. I mean, there's a scene where he's hurt and in bed because he has lost this fight, I think, with the Vulture, and so he's gotten sick. He's fallen in the snow, and so he's got a little cold. And both girls show up with like different ways to take care of him, while he's in bed, and they're both wearing like the kind of dress that you would go to a club in. Actually, I guess that's just Mary Jane. Mary Jane always dresses like she's about to go to Studio 54. And Gwen Stacy is always like is it Veronica or Betty? Which is the blonde one? Like that's her role, so she's bookish, but like really sharp and like, really well dressed. Yeah. So they both show up, like one has soup and one has a book to read him. And then of course,
so it really is like Archie. Does that get distracting at any point in time?
What was again distracting to me reading it now in this year, so far removed from like when I was, when I kind of like picked up comic books again and had found Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's collaborations, I was like, oh my God, this is what I have wanted from comics as an adult and haven't been able to find. So I think when I read it, 10 years ago or whatever, it was still a part of that. Like, well, I'm not really connecting to the story, but I can't put my finger on it, but it just looks so good. And it's, the dialogue's snappy and it goes through and whatever. But now reading it, being like a little bit more sophisticated and having read a whole lot more of Image and other indie titles and stuff like that, I feel that it is a little bit distracting. Like it is a little bit too, I don't know. It feels to me like Jeph and Tim want this to be a comic from the 70s or 80s, not that they are writing a modern comic that is commenting about that kind of style.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it doesn't feel updated to look back on that with like a nostalgia. It feels like, no, they're just printing the nostalgia. Like even the new runs of Betty and Veronica, and I haven't read Archie, but like the oh my God, his name just escaped me. But Adam, who just did Betty and Veronica that I talked about, that that was an updating of that story. Like you felt like this is contemporary, and the nods to the 50s, 60s culture is kind of like fun and ironic. Whereas this just feels like they just wanted to make a book that feels like the 80s. Mm-hmm. Spider-Man, that is. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, how can I not remember the name of this creator that I love?
As per usual, it'll hit you as we go.
I know. This is like classic podcast error, where the people will angrily be commenting on on Instagram. What an idiot! But anyway, it was very enjoyable. I also don't know if that take that I have is just because I've never really liked Spider-Man as a character. So, maybe some of my criticism is just kind of based on this dismissal of the character. But for what it's, what it is, I enjoyed it. I reread it. I would say if you're interested in the story and art, pick it up in print, because even just flipping back through it while I'm talking to you, there are so many other, not even just the spreads, but there are so many times where Tim Sale uses the whole page as a panel. Like he will have a face off between Mary Jane on one side and like Flash Thompson on the other. And that's huge. Like that's a thing that you might have just pulled off like in a couple of panels on one page, but they've dedicated 2 whole pages to it. Or just like Harry laughing at Peter and it takes up half a page or something, just really cool stuff like that. Yeah. And I don't know where to where to end it with that. It doesn't, I think, like a lot of those books where they get a couple of huge creators to collaborate on a short run. In some way it's fun because it's like a what could have been story, but in some ways, I guess what I'm saying and why I preface it with my general about Spider-Man is this doesn't feel vital to me. Like this doesn't really tell something about that character that I'm going to take with me, whereas their Batman books, I think, are the opposite. Like their Batman books so inhabit that character of Batman, that like that's how I think of Batman,
Mm.
But the
You
Marvel books just haven't felt that way to me. Sorry, I've interrupted you
no, no,
twice.
no, no, quite. No, I was interrupting you. You may have mentioned this before. This is a else. Is this Elseworlds? Is this out of main continuity at the time? Do we know?
No, I think it's just written where it can happily exist in this sort of gray region, and especially because it's told as Peter recounting the story in a tape recorder, like to Gwen after her death.
Mm.
It's like this is not a retelling of her death or anything else. It's like they've just made a story that hadn't quite been told before and
Mm.
sort of put it together. And so it's not necessarily Elseworlds, but yeah, it's just told in a way. And maybe that's why it feels a little inconsequential to me, is because, yeah, it doesn't really impact the larger timeline in any way, negative or positive, which can be a good thing. That's like what I often say I want in comics. Like, just tell episodic adventures. That's what I want. And looking through the DVD extras at the back and some of the sales sketches and like their comments of it, I know I've seen this before and just hadn't thought of it until just now, where Tim shows a lot of panels of Spider-Man like from the 70s and 80s and how he modeled his characters after them. So yeah, that's the absolutely intentional way that this has been drawn and written.
That's cool. Wow.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. I don't know what else I could add to it. There's probably no way to spoil it, but so
Is this just to recap? Which we heard Vulture, I heard Craven, I heard Lizard. What other villains?
Okay, so if yeah, it starts with a fight with Green Goblin, and Rhino, I think, is the only one you've left out.
Okay.
Yeah, so the electric guy, whatever his name was, Electro or something,
Mm-hmm.
is not in it. And I think the rest of that is the Sinister Six, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So I yeah. There's a reference to Dr. Octopus. I'll put it that way. I
Okay.
don't want to
But it's
yeah.
interesting because even like the beginning when you said that this book is where the notion of Peter Parker taking Osborn out of the suit and getting him help, like that was at the end of the first Raimi movie.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to look back and think about like how much of this was intentionally influenced by the movies or vice versa.
Well, and also I don't know if that was like a part of the Spider-Man canon already, and maybe what Loeb and Sale are doing is saying like, hey, here's another way that could have gone. And maybe that's like their inciting incident, like that was already in canon, and they're just taking it like, here's the story you didn't hear of what was going on in his personal life with Gwen and Mary Jane. Yeah, so I don't know. If you like Spider-Man, I bet you like this, because I bet it feels fun, like a flashback to the 70s or 80s and stuff.
Yeah.
I see it mostly as a collector's item from the Loeb Sale collected works.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about building a library around those two guys, but as you've been talking, I've been going through their credits list, and there's quite a bit.
Yeah, I left out Superman for All Seasons, which is they're one that Sale illustrated very Norman Rockwell-y, which is a really interesting book too. Yeah, they are such a great entrance point if you want, like, especially if you're an older reader that's like doesn't really know where to start getting back into comics. And like you and I talk about a lot, like, where do you pick up when the new, in a Batman series that's going on? Like, I think Loeb and Sale are that thing of like, here's the hero you knew, and they're either going to tell you like new aspects of that hero or a new story that you didn't understand or didn't know before, but it's going to be in a way you understand. And there's they're not pushing the envelope in like trying to deconstruct the heroes themselves. So it's all very like superhero-y, but maybe they're pushing the envelope in the actual stories being a little bit deconstructed, like the flashbacks in this, or the psychotherapy in Hulk Gray, or the running calendar theme in Long Halloween, things like that. So
got it.
Yeah, I think they've done amazing work. So
Fantastic.
I'll keep reading them, and it's free on Prime Reading, so go get it. Where can people find that episode, number 57 of Panelism, in which I talked about Hulk Gray and other panelism goodies?
Why, Todd, it's wherever you find podcasts. You just search for Panelism wherever you find podcasts, and if you want more, go to panelism.inc, or on Instagram, it's panelism.inc as well, and that is .ink. So check it out, tell your friends, subscribe, share, give us any feedback you got. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up, so stay tuned, and I think, until next time, sir.
All right, yes. Other tag there, I'm just going to let it fade out, of course.
Yeah, we never have a clever ending, as you know, so the more awkward, the better. Tacos.
Oh, I know what I was going to say was, I think it's so funny when we're like, you can find us on panelism.inc and also at panelism.inc. I mean, it would be great. Like, I know what we are saying is we're everywhere as panelism.inc, but the truth is, like, we're not really on other social networks, so
true.
We don't want to say we're everywhere, but